Good afternoon, everyone. This is Erick Mertz, and today I want to talk a little bit about my most recent Patreon story, Longtime Listener. Um, the first inspiration for this story, um, as you might guess, is radio. I spent a lot of time in college on the radio. I did a show that from 2 to 4 in the morning on Tuesdays. Sometimes it was midnight to 4. If my relief didn't show up, it was 2 to 6. And I would sit in this lonely little booth on top of the Memorial Union, and I would play music and I would talk. And I never really knew who was listening. I imagined I was talking to the world. I imagined I had delusions of grandeur. I thought I was like changing the world through college radio. And as naive as that sounds, like God, it felt good. I never knew who was listening, but I was always playing music and speaking as though everyone were listening. That was always my thing. I want to feel like um, everyone's listening. And I got calls. I got frequent calls. Usually it was my friends calling to mess with me, ask for music, whatever. But sometimes I got calls from people, people studying up late at night. There was one guy who used to call from the Valley River Center, which is the little mall across the highway from the U of O campus. And he'd call and ask for songs, and it was just great. So I wanted to do a story about a guy on the radio speaking into the void, speaking into the uncertain night that that I think any overnight DJ imagines. I can't imagine how you couldn't, frankly. I wanted to do a story about when the void talks back, right? When you are speaking into that void, not sure who's listening, what happens when the voice that calls back, is that compelling? That was a real draw for me in this story. I think I also knew I know in my series, I haven't touched on it a lot yet, but I will. And it's this idea of a poison idea. This idea that like when an idea gets in your head and you just can't untie that knot, right? And I think it happens to all of us. Think about a song that gets in your head, something you obsess over, something somebody said that didn't make sense that you spend a little extra time trying to figure out. I love this in a sort of a horror sense, this idea that people, that somebody could kind of invade the sanctity of your mind and your psyche by planting a poison idea. In this case, it's sort of an unfinished rhyme. I really love this idea of an unfinished rhyme, right? Of having the couplets, like in that sort of sing-songy voice that we all learn as children, but not being able to complete it. I mean, it's such a fundamental rhythm of speech that we all know, but not being able to complete it. It just drives this character crazy. So those are sort of like the higher concept ideas that I wanted to touch on, that I really identified with and wanted to get down in the story. Just some other practical things. I got really inspired to write this on a road trip last summer when my family and I were driving. We were north of, where was it? North of Pendleton. We were on our way to Joseph. And out there's just a lot of prairie, a lot of it's not really prairie. It's like rolling grassland, in hills, and a lot of hills and a lot of, you kind of swoop down into a lot of just big open scenes. And I remember we were coming down off this little hill into this open kind of prairie stretch, and there was this building on the side of the road, and it was just it just looked like kind of like an old, I don't know, like office. It looked like one of those places where like a construction company would be run out of. But there was all this radio equipment around it. And there's like these not equipment, but like antennas and things. It had all the markings of being a radio station. And if you've traveled like rural America, you've seen, some like you get into a small town and sometimes there's just like a little old building where the radio station used to be, There's one up the street from me, actually, just like this little old, kind of church radio station was run out of this little kind of building. And that's that. And I love the simplicity of that, right? In this world where we're now like surrounded by multi-billion-dollar media conglomerates, there was a time in this country when media was just a local radio station run out of a little building. And that's the simplicity of that to me is just beautiful. And I want to preserve that maybe in story. So as we were coming down into this grassy area, there was this this little building, and it was for sale, and it had all this radio stuff, and I immediately had this idea in my head. But not as buying it for a radio station, but like, what if someone, bought an old radio station and wanted to turn it into something else, but like the ghost of the radio station was still there. And that's what this is, right? Staggers buys the building because he wants to open a gun shop, and in his excavation, his ambition. And I really enjoyed writing this sort of like, this guy wants to prove to his wife that this is going to work. I wanted to play on that archetype of like, I'm retiring, I'm going to open a business, I don't care what you say. And that's what he's doing. He wants to open a little gun shop. He wants to do, I got that idea driving around again, and there was a truck that just had this like mobile gun shop, and guy comes to your house and he works on your gun. And I thought, well, let's just marry those two ideas. A guy wants to buy this old building and open a gun shop, and it goes wrong. The ghost of the radio station remains. And of course, I won't spoil it, but like, if you haven't read it, but I like the idea of like, again, like I write a lot of curious characters. I realized that when I was rereading this, like curiosity is like, without curiosity, I don't have any characters, right? I don't have any stories, because mostly, like, again, and it's like a very Lovecrafty thing, right? Somebody finds something, and instead of just leaving it alone, they dig a little bit, they dig a little deeper, they find something they're not supposed to. And of course, Staggers in his new, this is going to be my business, and I'm gonna, open it. I'm going to open the box, and I'm going to look in it, and of course I'm going to listen to it. So I think that like, I'm always playing with curiosity. I like curious people. I regard myself as a curious person. And so, of course, I'm really drawn to curious characters. People who are just cannot leave it alone. And that's who this character is. He couldn't leave it alone, and it changed his life. As far as the end of the story goes, I don't want to give it away again if you haven't read it yet. But as far as the character who Staggers goes to visit at the end, I really like the idea of the person that has this terrible secret and spends their whole life kind of under its shadow. And this character at the end is very much that person. He knows what he buried out there. He knows that eventually it could come back to get him. And I think he's just the kind of guy that's like hoping to die before anybody finds what he's buried under, like what he's hidden. And I just love in that end scene that there's a big tonal shift. And I wanted, that kind of goes back to when the wife at the end kind of takes over and like, takes control of the interaction. I wanted that to be sort of a play on the beginning when Staggers was going to buy this building and open this business, not caring what his wife would have thought. So I wanted to play that on the end. Like, the wife is now taking over the story and saying, no way. So that's it. Like, that's kind of the inspiration for Longtime Listener. Hat tip to my friend George Lewis III. This is the name of his Twitter of his Instagram account is Longtime Listener, and I love that radio parlance, right? Hey, longtime listener, first time caller, wanted to use something kind of old time radio. I guess that's not really old time radio. That's like 60s, 70s, 80s radio. And I just love it. And I wanted to use as many of those things as I could. That's where the title came from. So thank you, George. Next story I've got, I'm kind of debating between a couple of them. I have a story called Hansel that I'm interested in putting out. I also have a story called Old Bones, Return to the River, What Belongs to the River. So I'm not sure exactly which one I'm going to put out next. Just wait and see. Thank you very much for your patronage, and I will see you in the next video.